Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here in a 4K. And I've got a group of various titles here, actually quite wide-ranging. Most of them are MGM Blu-ray releases. And the only downside I'll say at the top is the MGM discs tend to not have any extras. But in some cases, like the first Blu-ray I'm going to show, these are reprints of movies that have been out of print, and so if you've been trying to acquire them at higher prices, you can get them now cheaper through these sort of bare bones editions. But these are interesting movies, all of them. Start with one of the most interesting, and that's Eureka from 1983. This is Nicolas Roeg's film, a favorite of my good pal Elric Kane's. Roeg, of course, director of Walkabout, Don't Look Now, The Man Who Fell to Earth, which, by the way, is a likely influence on Oppenheimer, as well as Bad Timing and Insignificance, which he made before and after Eureka. And Insignificance could also be an influence on Oppenheimer, one would think. But anyway, Roeg is a fascinating, art house kind of filmmaker, and I've always enjoyed his visual style too, and he can just be very compelling in terms of, where he puts the camera, the way that he edits the films. Often there is an element of time being jumped around, whether it's forward or backward. In the case of Performance, which I didn't mention because he co-directed that. But yeah, he's always got something interesting that he's doing. And this particular film, like I said, has been out of print since, I want to say, about 2016. I have the Twilight Time version that they put out at that point. There was also, I believe, a Eureka version overseas, but as far as I know, in terms of in the States, it's been out of print for a little while. And it's a movie that I think is really neat in terms of, I'm a huge Gene Hackman fan. I love Gene Hackman. He plays a guy called Jack McCann in this movie, and it definitely seems like at least the beginning of the film, if not the whole thing, was an influence on PTA and There Will Be Blood, except in this movie, instead of oil, it's gold that we're talking about. And there's even a scene where Hackman falls into a hole and discovers the gold and gets it kind of all over himself. But yeah, similar story of gold as a motivator versus oil. But again, the cast. Okay, so Gene Hackman plays this patriarch. Teresa Russell is his daughter. Rutger Hauer is her suitor. Mickey Rourke and Joe Pesci star as two guys who are sort of courting the Hackman character for a business deal. We jump forward like 20 years, I think. Let me. Yeah. And then we also have Ed Lauter, who I'm a huge, huge fan of. And Joe Spinell even shows up in this. So it says in 1925, Jack McCann Hackman, a gold prospector, strikes it rich beyond his wildest dreams, but 20 years later, long after having achieved his goals, Jack finds his passion for life is gone. Arrogant and abusive, he becomes obsessed with the motives of those around him, suspicious that even his own family, greedy and calculating, could exact the ultimate price. And it's it's over 2 hours long. It's not quite an epic, but it's definitely a movie that lets you really sort of luxuriate in these characters. And it seems like Roeg could even be calling on a little bit of Citizen Kane himself in moments. There's something about it. I'm going to read just a little bit from the booklet essay that came with the Twilight Time Blu-ray to give a little more background. Like many films from its distinctive director, Nicolas Roeg, Eureka is kind of a fever dream jam-packed with astonishing visuals, sequences of violent sex and erotic violence, heavy references to, quote, magic, from Kambala to tarot to corrupted voodoo, twisted relationships, an overall theme that in particular seems to owe more than a little something to Citizen Kane. Like Kane, Eureka's anti-hero Jack McCann played with a beautifully brazen willingness to be disliked by the superb Gene Hackman. That's another thing I got to say about Hackman is he did take on some roles, especially in the 70s and 80s with certain directors where, you know, they're very dislikable characters, and he embraced that and somehow made that his own. And I do find it interesting, too, in moments, I was reminded slightly of the Royal Tenenbaums. And Royal Tenenbaum, the character, obviously this guy's not funny at all like Royal is, but there's a couple moments where he's laying in bed, and I was like, oh, man, maybe Wes Anderson is a fan of this, too. Anyway, has been blessed / cursed with a mining fortune like Kane. McCann is a man who has to pay the price for getting what he thought he wanted, and he even has a snow globe-like translucent rock containing a figure not of a rosebud sled, but of his lost self. Yeah, he does find this rock that becomes a sort of a talisman almost, which, come to think of it, amounts to the same thing. It's surprising to learn, then, that the wildly poetic, grimly bizarre Eureka is based upon and follows quite closely a series of true-life events. Now, I didn't know this. The life and particular death of the American-born Sir Harry Oakes, a now mostly forgotten gold miner, entrepreneur, investor, and philanthropist. Like his cinematic counterpart, Oakes spent 15 years as a prospector before finally making one of the richest gold strikes in history. His Lakeshore mine, discovered in 1912, would eventually be the most productive in the Western Hemisphere. In typical roguish fashion, Eureka jumps straight from the exultant discovery of gold to its protagonist's luxurious, isolated splendor decades later on Bahamian Island, neatly skipping a few details. In fact, Oakes, seeking a tax shelter for his enormous fortune, did move to the Bahamas in 1935, became a British citizen, and was created a baronet in 1939 as a reward for his philanthropic efforts. Anyway, I won't go too deep in that, but it's fascinating as a film, and it really is, while not as good for me as There Will Be Blood, I think it's really something special and a movie that needs to be talked about a little bit more. It's been logged surprisingly more than I would have thought. I looked at Letterboxd. It's logged over 4,000 times there, and that's not insignificant, but it is. I'll give you a sort of a comparison to that with my next film, which is very different. So anyway, this is a widescreen Blu-ray. It's 185:1. No extra features. Not even a trailer, I don't think. But this next disc has lots of extra features, and this is Love Actually, 4K. Now, I have to admit something to y'all right now, and my wife even acknowledged it last night when she saw me watching the movie. I, for the longest time, kind of hated this movie. Like, I think I saw it when it came out or thereabouts. And it just struck me as like false, schmaltzy crap, you know, just a movie that I thought was too cheesy and did not appeal to me. But I have to admit right now that I was wrong, and it is a charming film, and I've been missing watching it all these years as a Christmas favorite, like a lot of people do. In fact, I think it was even getting like some kind of a re-release at some theaters now because it's become such a favorite. And to give just an idea of how much this movie's been watched, it's been logged 752,000 times on Letterboxd. So a movie that's very popular, and from director Richard Curtis, who did things like directorially like About Time and The Boat That Rocked, but he was more prolific as a screenwriter, working on things like Bridget Jones' Diary, both films, I believe, Notting Hill, which is probably my favorite that he's done, Four Weddings and a Funeral, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, and others. And it's a sweet story. It's, as he will say in one of the later, in the making of, which comes with this 4K, it's a new feature, about a 30-minute feature, which includes director Richard Curtis, producer Tim Bevan, casting director Fiona Weir, Bill Nighy, the actor, production designer Jim Clay, first assistant director Chris Newman, actor Abdul Salis, Thomas Brody Sangster, and then editor Nick Moore and cinematographer Mike Coulter and others. It's a nice little feature, and I'll get to the rest of the features in a minute, but that's the new one. And all the features, by the way, are included on the 4K. This is a 4K Blu-ray digital code set. But all the features are included on the 4K itself. So I'll get to the rest of those in a minute, but that's the new one. One of the things Curtis says in that interview is that he loves the big multi-story movies, films like Shortcuts, Nashville. He mentioned Wayne Wang's Smoke, but he didn't think anyone had done that sort of thing with love stories. And so that is the ambition or the attempt that he's trying to make here. And that's part of the reason the movie's over 2 hours long, which I think was another problem I had with it at the time, was it's just, I didn't like it and it was too long. But this time it's way more up my alley and way more appealing. Maybe I've just gotten older and softer. I don't know. Maybe I just caught it at the wrong time. I also had kind of a Keira Knightley problem. I just was not really a fan of her. And so when she would pop up in this movie, I was immediately checked out. I just was not into that stuff, that section of the movie. But it's a neat movie because it's got a really remarkable cast that I can go through here, and I can kind of talk about what some of those characters are. But like Alan Rickman, Bill Nighy, Colin Firth, Emma Thompson, Hugh Grant, Laura Linney, Liam Neeson, Keira Knightley, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Martin Freeman, the aforementioned Thomas Brody Sangster, Rowan Atkinson shows up, Rodrigo Santoro. It's a really epic cast. And another thing that Richard Curtis said was that it was like making 10 different movies, or a bunch of different movies, because every 10 days they'd have another group of actors. And I guess they sort of filmed each of the storylines back to back, which must have been pretty tricky to pull off. But so just a few of the plot lines. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's a lot. But Hugh Grant plays the new Prime Minister of England, and he finds himself drawn to one of his staff members. Bill Nighy is an over-the-hill singer who has released a new version of Love Is All Around, but they've changed it to Christmas Is All Around, a clear cash grab, and he's so kind of over everything that he, even in interviews, he's like, yeah, it's a terrible song, I admit it, and all this stuff. It's pretty funny. Liam Neeson is a recent widower whose son is in love, and he decides to direct his energies to helping his son. Martin Freeman is a stand-in for movies, and he meets a girl while working on a sex scene, a stand-in for a sex scene, and it's pretty funny to just see them trying to have idle conversation while doing that. But there's a bunch of other storylines happening here, and it is enjoyable to watch, and I get it now. Okay, so there's that, and it looks very nice in this 4K, the best I'm sure it's looked. And so that making of is the one thing I mentioned, and then we have a bunch more stuff that's from previous editions of this film. So you have these, well, for one, you have a commentary track which has director Richard Curtis. He's joined by Bill Nighy, Hugh Grant, and Thomas Sangster. And apparently Nighy and Sangster at the time of the commentary had not seen the completed film when recording the commentary. And it's just sort of a jovial talk. Maybe not a ton of substance. Nighy's pretty quiet. And yeah, I mean, it's it's cute. It's a cute commentary. I enjoyed it for what it is. There's not a ton of substance there, but it's still enjoyable. There's 37 minutes of deleted scenes, and in his video introductions, Curtis explains that the first cut of the movie was 3.5 hours. So in order to reduce it to a more commercially viable length, he ended up having to cut a bunch of stuff that were otherwise perfectly good scenes. And among the material that is been taken out are some funny stuff with Liam Neeson's character, Emma Thompson's character, and the Nighy storylines. And there's a bunch of other stuff there that I highly recommend checking it out if you're a fan and you haven't seen those. The music of Love Actually, that's 19 minutes, and it's a bunch of sort of another group of video introductions with Richard Curtis discussing his choices for music, and he talks about some musical influences, and then it'll go into the scene. Something called The Storytellers, a 10-minute EPK featurette that has the cast and crew interviews, just your typical fluff kind of EPK from the time. Kelly Clarkson video, 4 minutes. The song is The Trouble with Love Is. Lots of clips from the movie in there. And a Billy Mack video for Christmas Is All Around. Billy Mack is the Bill Nighy character, and it's spoofing the Robert Palmer music videos. You see this in the movie, but this is the sort of video itself. So that's a lot of stuff for this disc, and like I said, I was wrong, and people should definitely be checking out Love Actually, especially this time of year. It's a great holiday movie and a great romantic film. Okay, speaking of romance, on the lighter side, we have Bikini Beach from 1964. Now, this is actually the third. Let's do some background first. Let's talk about AIP and what AIP was doing in the 1960s. They were chasing a teenage audience, certainly, and it makes sense that they'd be doing that so hard because there were something like 4,000 drive-ins in the 1950s and early 60s. I think that was the height of the drive-in era, so we're getting towards the edge of the height in 1964, but still a lot of teenagers with disposable income going to movies at the drive-in, and we're into these kind of hangout movies, right? So AIP, American International Pictures, makes the first of these films, Beach Party, with Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello, and that came out in 1963. And it's crazy how many of these films they made and in how quick succession they made them. Like, we're talking multiples a year, and I'll go through that here. But Beach Party makes $2.3 million on a $300,000 budget, so that's a good size hit for AIP, so they jump right on the bandwagon and start making more of these. Then comes Muscle Beach Party, which also came out in 1964, the same year as Bikini Beach, but it came out before then. Frankie and Annette also starred in that. Then Bikini Beach in the summer of 64, followed by Pajama Party, also 1964 in November. I'll talk about Pajama Party in a minute. I've got that disc here too. Next was Beach Blanket Bingo, which I always thought was the first one, but was actually like the 5th one. That's in April of 65. And then Ski Party in late June of 65, followed by How to Stuff a Wild Bikini in mid-July of 65. So 7, I think, total movies, and it's crazy how quickly they cranked them out. You know, they really, and they all have these kids, quote unquote, Frankie and Annette and their gang of friends hanging out at the beach, California beaches. There's usually singing, often by Frankie and or Annette, and others. There's dancing, and there's typically some plot to get the kids off the beach, or maybe that's just a couple that I've watched here. Don Rickles was in 4 of the 7, and they would also bring in older actors, film stars like Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff, Buster Keaton, Elsa Lanchester. Those two will come up in a minute. But Bikini Beach has a subplot with Keenan Wynn, who is a newspaper columnist who has a chimpanzee that drives his car. These movies get pretty weird, which I guess may have had the appeal at the time and still kind of appeals to me in a way. So Keenan Wynn with his column is crusading against the kids on the beach, and he goes by Harvey Huntington Honeywagon. And yeah, this movie opens with the entire gang on a giant, like, truck, an open back truck, singing the theme song with Frankie and Annette driving, and the whole gang in the back, and then they're pulling like a sort of beat up Airstream trailer. And I guess the kids are just going to hang out at the beach for the whole summer. Like, that's the plan. They have like a shack the guys stay in and the girls stay in the Airstream. Another one of the conflicts in this is that they notice when they start setting up that there's a big tent nearby for a British singer called the Potato Bug, which I guess is sort of a takeoff on the Beatles. And that singer is played also by Frankie Avalon. And so immediately has beef with the Frankie character that Frankie Avalon plays, who is, I guess jealous and or doesn't want this guy horning in on his chick action. So anyway, it's fascinating. And British pop star comes between Dee Dee and Annette Funicello and Frankie. Will it be resolved by the end of summer vacation? These are the stakes we're talking about here, folks. And yeah, it's fun, goofy stuff, and like I said, I can't believe how many of these movies they made and how quickly. But they were mostly directed by William Asher, except for Pajama Party, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Maybe one other one didn't get a William Asher directing. But yeah, they're just oddball, crazy movies from the 60s, and they really feel like 60s movies to me in that sense. Okay, so let's move on. That's Bikini Beach, and then following that we have Pajama Party, which from 1964 may be my favorite of these movies. And it moves away from the beach a little bit, although they are at the beach some too. The other thing I meant to mention is that one of the regular stars that I find amusing is Jody McCrea, who was the son of Joel McCrea, a longtime classic Hollywood actor. Jody McCrea is in, I think, almost all of these, and he's a big guy, looks kind of like his dad. He often has weird names like Big Lunk, I think is his character's, Big Lug or Big Lunk is his character's name in Pajama Party. And this one is so goofy and so kind of like, what? That it's got some appeal to me. Basically, Martians are planning to invade the Earth, and they're sending Tommy Kirk as an ambassador / spy. Tommy Kirk, of course, from a bunch of Disney movies from the 50s, like The Shaggy Dog and Misadventures of Merlin Jones, one of my faves. He's an interesting actor. I've always found him kind of funny in whatever way, because he's kind of uptight, and he often plays uptight, but he's also just sort of goofy in his own way that I can't explain. And so he gets sent down by the Martians, one of which is played by Don Rickles, and they're planning an invasion in like 10 days or something. So he has like a teleporter thing that he can put on a wardrobe that if you switch the knobs, you can teleport things up and down to the Martian spaceship, I guess. That's one thing. And he arrives in this like jetpack, and Elsa Lanchester, who stars in this, the bride of Frankenstein herself, is working in her garden, and he shows up and his jetpack is broken. He asks her to help him down. She's kind of a goofy lady, so she's kind of like, whatever, and she helps him down, and he ends up sort of staying with them. And her nephew is Big Lunk, played by Jody McCrea. She runs a dress shop, and there's a group of, I don't know if they're like off mobsters or criminals that live nearby, but they know that Elsa Lanchester's dress shop loses money, like $25,000 a month or something, because she just wants to appeal to teenagers, but she doesn't, I guess, understand business. And I guess every month, Jody McCrea shows up at the bank with $25,000 in cash to deposit. So they're sure that when Elsa Lanchester's husband died, he left her a bunch of money, and that, they want to find out where that money is so they can steal it. That's one of the driving plots behind this one. They even hire Buster Keaton, who plays a Native American chief called Rotten Eagle. Definitely dicey now. Is supposed to help with the scheme by using his Swedish girlfriend, this blonde woman who doesn't really speak English except for ya, to help seduce Jodie McCrea, and maybe he'll tell her where the money is, blah, blah. And then this time the crusade against the teenagers is led by Harvey Lembeck, who is a comedic actor of this time. And he is like one of the oldest motorcycle gang leaders in the history of the movies. And his motorcycle gang wants the kids off the beach. And they're going after Jodie McCrea's character in particular. And there's some confusion when Jodie McCrea's character's hat, this red cap, gets switched with Tommy Kirk. And anyway, movie ends in a really interesting and enjoyable pajama party at a pool at the Elsa Lanchester's house. There is beach action here, but it's more people hanging around the houses a little bit. So it's a little different. But it very much feels like a live-action cartoon. There's even a moment where like Harvey Lembeck's sidecar motorcycle goes off a cliff. And there's definitely a few things that I like where they address camera. Often Frankie Avalon is looking at camera, commenting or giving just a quick look. But there's a moment when Harvey Lembeck's sidecar goes off the cliff where it's literally like Wile E. Coyote. It almost looks like it goes and drops and everything. Anyway, very, very strange film. Can't believe it was made at all, let alone in the midst of this cycle. But like I said, it's so silly and so strange that it is ultimately probably my favorite in this entire group. So anyway, that's Pajama Party. These MGM discs don't have any extra features, as I mentioned, so you're just getting the movies. And the last one I have, another MGM, is Navy SEALs. Totally different than the other movies. And this one, definitely dated in a lot of ways. I remember being a fan of it when it came out. I was all about the Navy when I was in high school, and I wanted to at first I wanted to fly a plane. I wanted to be a Blue Angel. Then I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. I found out because I had asthma, there's things I probably wasn't going to be able to get into the Navy. Maybe I could, but not into these, elite groups. And I don't know what I was thinking anyway. It's crazy. But this movie just became a joke at a certain point. Because of like Clerks, there's that one moment where the guy turns around to the camera, he's like, "Ooh, Navy SEALs," and it opens with this little mantra, this little setup of, in 1962, President Kennedy, believing that the wars of the future would be low-intensity conflicts such as guerrilla wars and acts of terrorism, created an elite special forces unit to meet the enemy on his own turf. Experts in sea, air, land operations, they are known as Navy SEALs. And it's directed by Louis Teague, who I am definitely a fan of, who, speaking of AIP, sort of connects back to Roger Corman and made things like Lady in Red and Alligator and Cujo. This is after that. This is a bigger studio movie for him, one of the bigger budgets he worked with. Feels like a response to the popularity of Top Gun in a lot of ways, and there's even some crossover casting because it has Rick Rossovich as one of the SEALs. But as you can see, the main SEALs are Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn. And there's even like some very similar shots of the SEALs walking on the runway next to airplanes with flight gear on that looks just like Top Gun. But the cast, very solid. Besides Sheen and Michael Biehn, you have Bill Paxton as God. He's a sniper. And there's a great bit in the opening where they have an extraction that they're doing. And they're like, calling, and he's like, God here. And he's like up in a tower and he's helping them. And he's very good. Joanne Whalley plays a reporter. Dennis Haysbert is one of the other SEALs. And we open with like Charlie Sheen passed out on a beach in Norfolk, Virginia. And it's clear there's been some partying the previous night. And we realize that it's to celebrate the upcoming wedding of Dennis Haysbert's character. And so they're on their way to the wedding. They're late. And Charlie Sheen, I always remember this. They're going over a bridge with like under a river or whatever. And he jumps out of the Jeep off the bridge into the river because he's a crazy guy. He loves the rush, man. That's what he lives for. And in fact, to his own detriment in some ways. He's Lieutenant Dale Hawkins. and he plays by his own rules. Bean is James Curran, and Bill Paxton is God, as I said. On the way out of extracting some hostages, which they get called away from Dennis Haysbert's wedding to do, because they're like Batmen. They have pagers, if people remember those. I think Charlie Sheen's character discovers a cache of handheld missile launchers called Stingers, and he wants to blow them up, but they're trying to get the extraction done and get out, and they've been ambushed by a lot more, enemy folks than they thought they would, and so Michael Bihn's character makes the tough decision to just get out of there and leave those Stingers behind, and needless to say, the higher-ups aren't happy about that, and they put the team on leave, which we do get a very silly goofing around on the golf course montage set to the boys are back in town, followed by the whole team really wanting to get out there and get those Stingers back. It's got some crazy stunts, like Charlie Sheen's character's car getting towed and him chasing it down on a bicycle and jumping on the back and riding it off the back of the tow truck. He just loves to do crazy stuff. But yeah, so the team wants to get these missiles. There's some pretty overwrought emotional scenes. Some scenes feel like commercials for the Navy. But it's got some decent action to it and some suspense, and the characterizations are enjoyable enough. It definitely didn't hold up for me as it did when I was a kid, and its politics are maybe a little more questionable now. Yeah, it's a fascinating movie, and one that I had not seen in a long, long time. Though I did remember Bill Paxton's character. I remembered him jumping out of the Jeep. There were things about it that came back to me. But anyway, interesting to watch after all this time. Navy SEALs, again, no extra features on this one. But you do get the film. So anyway, that will do it for this round of stuff. Hopefully there's some stuff in here for you to check out. I did enjoy everything that I watched on some level or another. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.